What if the person you were forced to marry turned out to be the one who saved your life? Royce Barrett stood at the altar, his jaw clenched tight as he watched the woman walking toward him. She was nothing like he had imagined, nothing like he had hoped for. But in 6 months, this same woman would save his life, his ranch, and everything he thought he knew about himself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the small wooden church as Royce tugged at his collar, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. His father, Cyrus Wainwright, sat in the front pew with arms crossed, his cold eyes fixed on his son like a hawk watching prey. There was no escape now. The debts were too high, the creditors too impatient, and this marriage was the only way to keep the Barrett Ranch from being seized. Magnolia Voss moved slowly down the aisle, her simple brown dress rustling with each step. Royce's stomach twisted as he studied her round face and heavy frame. This wasn't how he had pictured his wedding day. He had dreamed of marrying someone beautiful, someone who would make other men envious. Instead, he was being bound to a stranger whose father owned the land adjacent to theirs. Land that came with water rights, worth more than gold in this drought-stricken territory. "Breathe, boy," he whispered to himself, his hands trembling slightly. "It's just business, nothing more." But as Magnolia approached, something unexpected happened. She looked up and met his eyes directly, and instead of the shame or nervousness he expected to see, there was something else entirely. Her gaze was steady, almost challenging, as if she could read every thought racing through his mind. "Mr. Barrett," she said quietly when she reached the altar, her voice carrying a strength that surprised him. "Miss Voss," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The preacher began his familiar words, but Royce barely heard them. His mind was spinning with resentment toward his father, toward this situation, toward the woman standing beside him who represented everything he didn't want. He thought about the other men in town who would snicker behind his back, about the jokes they would make about his hefty wife. But what if the woman he judged so harshly was hiding a secret that would turn his world upside down? Stay tuned to Narrative Sphere to find out. Therefore, when the preacher asked if he took Magnolia as his wife, Royce's "I do" came out flat and emotionless. But when Magnolia spoke her vows, her voice rang clear and confident through the small church, and something in her tone made him look at her again. Her eyes weren't downcast or apologetic. They blazed with a fire he hadn't noticed before. And when she said, "I do," it sounded less like acceptance and more like a declaration of war. The ring felt heavy on his finger as they walked out of the church together. But what felt even heavier was the realization that he knew absolutely nothing about the woman he had just married. And from the way she held herself, straight-backed and proud, despite the whispers from the small crowd, he suspected she was far more than she appeared. But Royce had no idea that before the sun set on their wedding day, Magnolia would prove just how dangerous it was to underestimate her. The ride back to the Barrett Ranch was the longest hour of Royce's life. Magnolia sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, saying nothing, but her silence wasn't meek or submissive. It felt like the quiet before a storm. "I suppose you'll want to see the house," Royce finally said, desperate to break the tension. His voice came out more gruff than he intended. "I've already seen it," Magnolia replied, without looking at him. "3 times, actually, while you were in town drinking away your sorrows about this marriage." Royce's hands tightened on the reins. How did she know about his trips to the saloon? He had been careful, or so he thought. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." There was something almost amused in her voice now. Just like you don't know that your ranch hands have been selling your cattle to pay their own debts. Or that your father owes money to half the territory. Not just my family. The wagon hit a rut, jarring them both. But Royce barely noticed. His mind was reeling. That's impossible. The hands have been with us for years. Loyalty doesn't put food on the table, Mr. Barrett, and desperate men do desperate things, Magnolia said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes held knowledge that made his stomach sink. Your foreman, Wade McKinley, has been skimming from the cattle sales for 6 months. Your father knows but can't afford to fire him because Wade's the only one keeping the other hands from quitting. Therefore, when they pulled up to the ranch house, Royce sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at his property with new eyes. The sagging fence posts he had ignored, the overgrown corral that needed repair, the thinning herd in the pasture. Suddenly, it all made sense. His father hadn't just been gambling away their money. They had been bleeding cash from multiple wounds. And this marriage was a tourniquet, not a cure. How do you know all this? He asked, his voice barely audible. Because I've been preparing for this marriage longer than you have, Magnolia said, stepping down from the wagon with surprising grace. My father didn't just arrange this union for the land rights, Mr. Barrett. He arranged it because your ranch is the key to controlling water access for 3 counties. But someone has to be smart enough to make it work. She walked toward the house, then paused at the front steps. The question is whether you're smart enough to listen or proud enough to lose everything while pretending you know better. Royce watched her disappear through the front door of what was now their home, his mind spinning with questions. Who was this woman? How had she learned so much about his family's business? And most disturbing of all, what else did she know that he didn't? But as he unhitched the horses, one thought kept gnawing at him. If Magnolia knew this much about his problems, what exactly was her plan to solve them? By evening, Royce discovered that marrying Magnolia was like inviting a tornado into his house. Everything familiar was about to be rearranged. He found her in his father's study, sitting behind the massive oak desk as if she owned it, papers spread before her like a battle plan, account books, land deeds, and what looked like legal documents covered every inch of the surface. But what made his blood run cold was seeing Wade McKinley standing in front of the desk like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "What's going on here?" Royce demanded, stepping into the room. Wade's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your wife. She knows about the cattle." "Of course I know," Magnolia said calmly, not looking up from the papers. "I know you've been selling 15 head a month and reporting only 10. I know you've been pocketing the difference. And I know you plan to blame it on rustlers when the books finally came due." Royce felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The numbers had never made sense, but his father had always handled the books, and Wade had been like family. "Wade, tell me this isn't true." The foreman's shoulders sagged. "The ranch was going under anyway, Royce. I got kids to feed." "Had," Magnolia corrected, her voice sharp as a blade. "You had a job. Now you have a choice. Return what you stole, or I'll have the sheriff here before sunrise." But Wade's face suddenly hardened. "You think you can just waltz in here and start giving orders? You're nobody. Just some fat woman whose daddy paid to get rid of her." The silence that followed was deafening. Royce expected Magnolia to crumble, to shrink back from the cruel words. Instead, she stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Mr. McKinley," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you seem to be under the impression that my size reflects my strength. That's your first mistake." She opened the desk drawer and pulled out a small leather journals. "Your second mistake was assuming I came here unprepared. She opened the journal and began reading. May 15th, sold 20 head to Morrison's outfit. Reported 12. May 22nd, sold 18 head to the railroad camp. Reported 10. June 3rd. She looked up at Wade, whose face had gone white. Should I continue? Because I have 4 months of detailed records, including the names of every buyer, and the exact amounts you pocketed. Wade's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but froze when Magnolia's voice cut through the air. I wouldn't, she said quietly, because your third mistake was thinking I came here alone. The sound of boots on the front porch made everyone turn. Through the window, Royce could see 3 men approaching the house, men he didn't recognize, but whose hard faces and tied-down guns marked them as anything but ordinary ranch hands. Who are they? Royce whispered. Magnolia smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and it wasn't a gentle expression. Men, Mr. Barrett, the kind that ensures people keep their word. Wade bolted for the door, but found his path blocked by the largest of the 3 men who had just entered. The stranger was built like a mountain, with scars across his knuckles and eyes that had seen too much violence. Going somewhere, friend? The big man asked pleasantly. But what happened next would teach Royce that he had married far more than just his father's solution to their debts. The confrontation lasted exactly 3 minutes. Wade McKinley, faced with 3 armed men and a woman who knew every detail of his thievery, crumbled like a house of cards in a windstorm. The money's hidden in my cabin, Wade stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. Most of it anyway. I spent some on medicine for my youngest. Magnolia's expression softened slightly. How much did the medicine cost? $40. The fever nearly killed her. Then you'll return the rest and consider the $40 your severance pay. She nodded to the big man blocking the door. Hank will escort you to collect it. Then you'll be gone by morning. But as Wade was led away, Royce grabbed Magnolia's arm. Wait, who are these men? How do you know them? For the first time since he'd met her, Magnolia looked uncertain. That's complicated. Complicated. How? Royce's grip tightened. My foreman just confessed to stealing from me because 3 armed strangers walked into my house. I think I deserve an explanation. Magnolia pulled free and walked to the window, watching as Hank escorted Wade toward the bunkhouse. My father didn't just arrange this marriage for the land, Royce. He arranged it because your ranch sits on the most valuable water rights in 3 territories. But there are other people who want those rights. Dangerous people. What? Kind of dangerous people? The kind who would rather see you dead than see you succeed. She turned back to him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. 3 weeks ago, a man named Cormac Doolan made an offer for your ranch. When your father refused, Doolan made it clear that accidents happen to stubborn ranchers. Royce felt his stomach drop. You're saying someone wants to kill me? I'm saying someone wants to kill anyone who controls this land. That's why my father moved so quickly with this marriage. That's why I brought protection. She gestured toward the men outside. And that's why we need to work together, whether you like me or not. But before Royce could respond, a gunshot echoed from the direction of the bunkhouse. Through the window, they saw Hank stumbling backward, clutching his shoulder, while Wade McKinley mounted a horse with a rifle in his hands. He was ready for this, Magnolia breathed. He knew we would find out. Another shot shattered the study window, sending glass cascading across the floor. Royce grabbed Magnolia and pulled her down behind the desk as bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. Stay down, he shouted, reaching for his gun belt. But when he looked around the edge of the desk, his blood ran cold. Wade wasn't alone. At least 6 riders had appeared at the edge of the property, all armed, all moving toward the house. "With deadly purpose, Magnolia," Royce said, his voice tight with realization. How did Wade know we were coming for him tonight? Her face went pale as the terrible truth hit them both. Because someone told him we would be. The house erupted into chaos as bullets punched through the walls like deadly rain. Royce crawled toward the gun cabinet, while Magnolia pressed herself against the floor behind the heavy desk. "How many men do you have?" Royce shouted over the gunfire. "3," Magnolia called back, "but Hank's wounded, and the other 2 are pinned down in the barn." Therefore, Royce realized they were outnumbered 2 to 1, trapped in a house that wasn't built to withstand a siege. But as he reached for his rifle, something made him freeze. Through the broken window, he could see Wade pointing directly at the study, gesturing to the other riders as if he knew exactly where they were hiding. "Magnolia," he said slowly. "Wade couldn't have known we'd be in this room unless someone told him our plan," she finished, her face grim. "Someone who knew I was going to confront him tonight. But who? The only people who knew were the 3 of them, and Magnolia's men outside." "Unless your father," Royce breathed. "Where is he?" "He left for town right after the wedding. Said he had business to attend to." Magnolia's eyes widened with realization. But he's the only one who knew the timing. A new volley of gunfire shattered what remained of the windows. Outside, Wade's voice rose above the noise. "Burn them out. The house is old timber. It'll go up fast." The smell of smoke began drifting through the broken windows. An orange light flickered against the walls. They had set fire to the front porch. "We have to move," Royce said, grabbing ammunition from the cabinet. "The back door is covered." Magnolia interrupted. "I saw 2 riders circle around. Therefore, they were trapped between fire and bullets with nowhere to run." But as the smoke grew thicker, Magnolia did something that shocked Royce completely. She stood up, walked calmly to the desk, and began stuffing papers into a leather satchel. "What are you doing?" Royce demanded. "We need to get out of here. These documents are worth more than this house," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The real reason Wade betrayed you. The real reason Cormac Doolan wants this land. It's all here." She pulled out a map covered in red markings and legal notations. "This isn't just about water rights, Royce. There's a railroad coming through this territory. Your ranch sits directly in the path of the proposed route. Whoever owns this land will be rich beyond imagination." But before Royce could process this revelation, the front wall of the house exploded inward as burning timbers crashed through the room. The fire was spreading faster than they had anticipated, and the smoke was becoming deadly. "The root cellar," Royce grabbed Magnolia's hand. "There's a tunnel that leads to the barn." They ran toward the kitchen as the ceiling began to collapse behind them. But as they reached the cellar door, Royce heard something that made his blood freeze. His father's voice calling out from the yard. "Royce, son, are you in there?" Cyrus Wainwright had returned, and from the tone of his voice, he seemed genuinely surprised by the fire. The root cellar tunnel was older than Royce remembered, the wooden supports creaking ominously as they crawled through the narrow passage. Behind them, the sound of the burning house grew fainter. But ahead lay the unknown danger of whoever might be waiting at the barn. "Your father sounds genuinely surprised," Magnolia whispered as they moved through the darkness. "Then who warned Wade?" Royce asked. But even as he spoke, a terrible possibility was forming in his mind. They emerged into the barn to find Hank sitting against a hay bale, his shoulder roughly bandaged, but his gun still in his hand. The other 2 men, whom Magnolia introduced as Frank and Cole, were positioned at the barn doors, watching the burning house. "Mom," Hank said when he saw them, "We got a problem. That foreman of yours, he knew exactly where we'd be positioned. Knew about the tunnel too." Therefore, Royce felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. Magnolia. Who else knew you were coming? Here tonight, who else knew your exact plan? Her face went pale in the flickering light of the fire. "Only my father." She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. And who? "My father's business partner. The man who helped arrange all the marriage details. Who knew about the railroad survey. Who had access to all the financial records of both our families." Her voice broke. "Ezekiel Marsh. My own father." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her father hadn't just arranged this marriage to save the Barrett Ranch. He had arranged it to destroy it. But why? Outside, Cyrus Wainwright's voice grew more frantic. "Royce, the house is lost. But if you're alive, answer me." He's not part of this, Royce realized. My father really doesn't know. But before they could decide whether to trust Cyrus, Frank called out from the barn door, "Riders coming! At least 10 of them, and they're not here to help fight the fire." Through the barn door, Royce could see torches approaching across the darkened ranch land. But these weren't concerned neighbors. They rode in formation, weapons ready, moving with military precision. "Cormac Deland," Magnolia breathed. This was all planned. The marriage, Wade's theft, the confrontation tonight, it was all designed to flush us out so Deland could finish this. Therefore, Royce understood that they had walked directly into a trap that had been months in the making. His marriage to Magnolia hadn't been a solution to his problems. It had been the final piece of someone else's plan to destroy everything he owned. "Your father sold us out," he said, though the words tasted bitter. "But why? What does he gain from our deaths?" Magnolia's face hardened with a resolve. Royce was beginning to recognize. "Everything. With both of us dead, he inherits my portion of the land deal and gets to sell water rights to Deland without interference. Plus, whatever Deland promised him for delivering your ranch." But as the riders drew closer, Magnolia reached into her satchel and pulled out something that made Royce's breath catch. It was a second map, one she hadn't shown him before, covered in different markings and signed with official seals. "What is that?" he asked. "Insurance," she said grimly. "And the real reason my father wants me dead tonight." The second map showed something that changed everything. Railroad routes, water rights, and land ownership. But with one crucial difference. This map bore the official seal of the territorial government and was signed by the railroad commissioner himself. "This is the real railroad route," Magnolia explained quickly, as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. "The one Deland and my father don't know exists. The railroad isn't coming through your ranch, Royce. It's coming through the valley 3 miles south, through land that becomes worthless without access to your water rights." Therefore, Royce realized that everything, the threats, the marriage, the planned destruction, was based on false information. But if Deland knows the real route, he doesn't. Only 3 people have seen this map. The railroad commissioner, myself, and now you. Magnolia's eyes blazed with determination. "I've been playing a longer game than anyone realized, including my father, but their revelation was interrupted by gunfire erupting outside the barn. Through the doorway, they could see Cyrus, Wainwright diving for cover behind a water trough, as Deland's men surrounded him. "They're going to kill him," Royce said, moving toward his rifle. "Wait!" Magnolia grabbed his arm. "Deland needs your father alive to sign over the deed. This is about more than just taking the land. It's about making it legal." Sure enough, they heard Deland's voice, booming across the yard. "Cyrus Wainwright, I know you're alive. Have a proposition for you." From their hiding spot, they watched as Doolan himself rode into the firelight, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes that reflected the flames of the burning house. He dismounted slowly, confidently, like a man who had already won. "Your son is dead, Cyrus," Doolan called out, "burned up with his fat bride, but you can still save yourself. Sign over the ranch deed, and I'll let you ride away with enough money to start over." But Cyrus Wainwright surprised everyone. Instead of cowering, he stood up from behind the water trough, his own gun drawn. "My son isn't dead, Doolan. And even if he was, I wouldn't sell his ranch to scum like you." Therefore, the standoff that followed lasted exactly 10 seconds. Doolan's men outnumbered Cyrus 20-1, and the old rancher knew it, but he didn't back down. "Kill him," Doolan ordered casually. That's when Magnolia did something that proved once and for all that Royce had married a woman unlike any other. She stepped out of the barn, hands raised, the government map clearly visible in her grip. "Mr. Doolan," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard, "before you make any permanent decisions, you might want to see what I'm holding." Every gun turned toward her, but Magnolia walked forward with the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. "This is the real railroad survey, signed and sealed by the territorial commissioner, and it shows that you've been planning to steal land that will be worthless in 6 months." Doolan's face went white as he recognized the official seals on the document, but his recovery was swift and deadly. "Then I guess I'll have to kill all of you and find another way to make money from this territory." But as his men raised their weapons, Magnolia smiled. The same dangerous smile Royce had seen in the study earlier. "That would be a mistake, Mr. Doolan, because the territorial marshal is already on his way, and he has very specific instructions about what to do with claim jumpers and murderers." The sound of approaching hoofbeats from the east made everyone freeze. But instead of more of Doolan's men, what emerged from the darkness was a sight that made the claim jumper's face go ashen. 6 territorial marshals, badges gleaming in the firelight, rifles ready. "Marshal Thompson," Magnolia called out calmly. "Perfect timing." Doolan spun toward her, his face twisted with rage and confusion. "This is impossible. How did you send word 3 days ago?" Magnolia finished. "The same day I discovered my father's plan to have us both killed. Did you really think I would walk into this marriage blind?" Therefore, as the marshals surrounded Doolan's men, the truth of Magnolia's strategy became clear. She hadn't just married Royce to save his ranch. She had orchestrated an elaborate trap to bring down the entire criminal conspiracy that threatened the territory. "Cormac Doolan," Marshal Thompson announced, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, illegal land seizure, and bribery of territorial officials." But Doolan made one last desperate play. He grabbed for his gun, shouting to his men, "Kill them all!" The gunfight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds. Doolan's hired guns, caught between the marshals and Magnolia's men, surrendered quickly when they realized they were outmatched and legally outgunned. Doolan himself took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to shoot Marshal Thompson, ending his threat permanently. As the dust settled and the marshals led the criminals away, Royce found himself standing next to his wife in the ruins of his burned home, finally understanding what he had gained and lost in a single day. "You planned all of this," he said, not as an accusation, but as amazed recognition. "I plan to survive," Magnolia replied, "and to make sure that you could too." "But why? You could have walked away. Let Doolan destroy everything. Why risk your life for a man who didn't want to marry you?" Magnolia turned to face him, and in the dying firelight, Royce saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. "Because I saw who you really were, Royce Barrett. Not the prejudiced man who judged me by my appearance, but the man who would sacrifice everything to protect his family. The man who crawled through a burning tunnel to save someone he barely knew." Therefore, Royce realized that while he had been focused on what he thought he was losing, he had been blind to what he was actually gaining. Magnolia wasn't just intelligent and brave. She was loyal, strategic, and had risked everything to save not just herself, but him and his father. "The railroad money," he said suddenly. "The real route will make us wealthy, but not the way anyone expected." Magnolia smiled. "The new route needs water rights for the station depot. Our water rights, legally, fairly, and profitably." 6 months later, Royce Barrett stood on the porch of his rebuilt home, watching his wife direct the construction of the new railroad station. She had been right about everything: the route, the profit, and most importantly, about the value of looking beyond appearances to see what truly mattered. He had been forced to marry a stranger he judged too quickly. What he discovered was a partner who saved his life, his ranch, and taught him that real strength comes in forms he never expected to recognize. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Only on Narrative Sphere. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to Narrative Sphere.